Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Normal Island Live. My name is Sneakcret. I'm chuffed to be joining you today as your host as we run through some of the major headlines / should be headlines this week. So on the cards for tonight, we're going to be covering the latest of Keir's entries for Least Uplifting Speech on Earth Award in his warning of the painful budget to come. We're going to be talking about how Israeli orders are hindering the UN in tackling a growing health emergency in Gaza. The campaign to discredit Bisan as her Emmy nomination for I'm Bisan and I'm Still Alive is defended by Natas. And we're going to talk through the exposure of transphobic comments being made by the Pink News CEO as we continue to witness the platforming of anti-trans propaganda in our media. Before we jump into that, though, I want to thank everybody who's tuned in today and welcome our wonderful guest for this evening, Jessica Harriet. Jessica, how are you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. I'm excited. Well, excited might not be the right word.
Yeah, but you were right with should be headlines. It's been a somewhat quiet week, but it should have been a lot louder.
Yeah, I think myself and Jessica were talking earlier about, I think on Monday when we first looked at what we were going to be covering today, the top headline was that Sven-Göran Eriksson had died. That was the top priority for BBC News. And then there was fish and chips prices going up.
Oh, yeah, that was huge for them. And then, of course, Oasis, that just took over everything.
That's the big three. So we are going to let the BBC cover that and focus more on those for tonight. But let's take a deep breath together and we'll jump into the first topic. So first thing on the cards for tonight, we have the painful budget preparation. The party that literally called their manifesto change have continued to flop on that promise this week by announcing what appears to be a nostalgic approach to economic recovery, austerity. Keir Starmer on Monday once again declared himself baffled by just how bad the economy is, despite having used that knowledge to justify their original uninspiring manifesto. In the speech, Keir did repeat his election promise that national insurance, VAT and income tax would not go up, but he once again pushed this grave rhetoric that tough decisions were going to need to be made. In that speech in the Garden, he did talk through the idea that I will be honest with you. There's a budget coming in October. It's going to be painful. Just as when I responded to the riots, I'll have to turn to the country and make big asks of you to accept short-term pain for long-term good, which is apparently the difficult trade-off for a genuine solution. Alongside this, Keir also seemed to lament the stress of not knowing if he had enough prison places to arrest everyone who was involved in the far-right riots and attacks in the last few weeks, seeming to suggest that the reason the rioters felt comfortable doing what they were doing was because they didn't think the government would have the resources to arrest them. Alongside this, he added that the riots didn't just betray the sickness, but they also revealed the cure to racism in the country, the cure being those who did clean up the streets after the riots. Jessica, I feel like you hit the nail on the head earlier when we were talking about this, calling Keir's speech the I'm going to underplay the race riots and hide behind Tory failings to carry on Tory austerity speech. Tell me how you feel.
I mean, pretty much exactly that way. It was just another disappointing speech from another disappointing prime minister. He talks about change that isn't going to happen overnight, but I don't think anybody realistically was expecting this change to happen overnight. We were just hoping that the discourse would at least be a little bit different to what we've been told for decades now. It just feels like more of the same. And then he brags about ending the strikes, but people strike because of poor working conditions and the cost of living in relation to their wage, austerity is just going to make that worse. Much like with the race riots, he's kind of just swept it under the rug. And I don't know, it's all about future economic growth, and it just feels like a worrying reflection of what the next 5 years are going to look like. He's going to hide behind Tory failings for as long as possible. We're going to get to 28, 29. He's going to talk about the foundations nearly being built, and in a couple of years we get to build something on them and we get change, but people are tired and they want to hear about change that will happen within those 5 years.
Any minute now we're going to get that change. Just a couple more years.
We hope so, at least.
I think, like I know he did the speech in the same garden where Dominic Cummings did his weird little confession, and he used it as an example of, well, when the Tories were here, they were being rubbish, and now we're in the same place being totally different. It's a totally different vibe now. I've got a different haircut to Dominic Cummings. I look completely different. It felt like I mentioned this when we had the Sunday debrief on the show, where we were talking about the whole point of that manifesto was like, oh, well, it's not very inspired, and sure, it's not enjoyable for you, but that's because we have to be realistic. We have to take realistic decisions here and be very practical. But then apparently those realistic ones, they weren't depressing enough. We've had to turn around and go even further back.
Yeah, it just feels completely counterintuitive. It's just not what anybody needs to hear at the moment. He's talking about wealth growth, but who is that for? His rich friends that he's refusing to tax. I feel like so many more people are growing increasingly aware of what actually needs to be done in order to fix these cracks that he's talking about. He's just completely diverting it at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's frustrating because the comment of like, we need to take serious steps to, like, we need real change to be able to find the solution. Parts of his rhetoric, I'm like, yes, we do need real change. Like pre-election, when he said the only thing that was going to stop the far right was real progressive politics. But the question then is, who are you talking about? Because you're coming back and reiterating the same talking points that we've heard again and again. The idea to me that the rioters were, the only reason they were rioting was because they thought that we didn't have enough prison places to arrest them is absolutely baffling.
Yeah, and it just reminded me of his speech during the riots where he said the motivations don't matter. What do you mean they don't matter? You are completely refusing to acknowledge the racial and religious motivations behind these race riots and lynch mobs and pogroms. But he just said, oh, they even tried to set fire to a building that had human beings inside. No, it was a lot more serious than that. They did exploit the cracks in our society, but those cracks were decades of anti-immigration rhetoric centered around this poor society that we're in because of a lack of resources that we can't control because of immigration, when in reality it's the austerity and corruption that they're carrying on.
I think that, that ties into some of the stuff we're going to talk about a little bit later as well, in terms of the kind of transphobic rhetoric that we're seeing. There seems to be this attempted introduction of like respectability politics again, of like, but in the sense that we're going to say the bigoted things, but in a nice way. We're going to smile at you as we say them, and we're going to be respectful about the way that we tell you that actually we think that the far-right dog whistles have a point, but they shouldn't have gone about it that way.
Which literally led to them being referred to as pro-British marches. And now we're just hearing more about it in the news. You know, Yvette Cooper's doubling down on it, and he said he's going to have ties in Europe to curb the immigration rates. And it's just, we're going to be hearing all the same rhetoric in the press as much as we have been before. You know, the far right are like water in a dam, and we've just seen what happens when that dam breaks. But Labour didn't stop the flooding. They didn't help the society underneath it. That was community showing up in strength and solidarity. They're just going to cover the cracks that he's been talking about and hope it doesn't break again.
That's a scary point that you've raised now that I'm thinking about. The idea that you've scared me now. That offer, the idea that the government is there to bring in the standing army and to open up the prison places, and we, the people, will do all the nice little bits around the side.
Which is exactly what we've shown. All he did was say, we've got this big police force and we're going to show up in numbers and that's going to be great. And all of that did was stop them for that one night. and then everybody else in the communities had to band together the days after.
Mm-hmm. It's been, yeah, I feel like everybody overall is pretty unimpressed with the speeches that has been made. I think we're still getting people coming out with, give them more time. Let's see how we go. They've said they're not going to increase certain taxes, but they also said they weren't going to increase quite a lot of other things that they've let increase.
Exactly.
So we'll see how we go with that. And we'll kind of tie a little bit more of that into the discussion as we go. Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm going to jump into the second topic for tonight. I think I've just seen a comment in the chat on the hearing more this week about Oasis than we have about Israel. So it was a little tiny footnote at the start of the week. Obviously, now with the amount of attacks that have been coming on, especially against medical facilities in Gaza, we have the UN vaccination program that has been hindered by Israeli evacuation orders. I know that at this point, it feels like there's just like a never ending onslaught of these stories that are coming out of Gaza and the West Bank. I remember seeing a few weeks back that there'd been the first outbreak of polio, but it was in amongst so many other like acts of devastation at the same time. But essentially this week, UN operations in Gaza have been halted after Israel ordered the Palestinians to be forcibly ejected from an area in central Gaza where the UN's operation center was located. As the UNRWA have said, their ability to undertake and implement humanitarian work is shrinking by the hour. Every time their evacuation orders were affected because our local staff are constantly on the move and they are the backbone of the humanitarian operation. Now, in August alone, they have hit a record of evacuation orders that have been given to the people of Gaza. This was the 12th one of the month, with around 12% of the entire population being forcibly displaced in this time frame. We've got 1.9 million people who are being pushed into smaller and more densely crowded areas. We know that there have already been a huge amount of health emergencies cropping up across the entire strip. But this order came as the UN were preparing to begin a vaccination rollout that was supposed to be reaching 640,000 children under the age of 10 in Gaza. That feels like a very large figure when you look at the total population of the Gaza Strip. Gaza, it does have an incredibly young average age. So for these 640,000 children, the vaccination was for polio. This came after a 10-month-old baby was paralyzed by the type 2 polio virus. And again, for context, this is the first confirmed case of polio in the enclave for 25 years. And it's also a disease that's been nearly eradicated globally. According to the UN, Israel have been cooperative in the delivery of around 25,000 vaccine vials over the weekend. But at the same time, they're showing absolutely no signs of pausing bombing the areas that these aid workers need to reach. Jessica, I know we've seen this constant comparison of we need to address a humanitarian emergency, but also we're literally going to continue enabling this violence for months at this point. I don't know what there is left to say about it, but I want to ask for your thoughts.
Well, I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. There is not much more we can say about it that hasn't been said by hundreds of thousands of people so much that the UK and the US governments are clearly so deeply complicit in this. This is displacement through weaponized disease. It almost feels like one of the worst ones we've seen. The UN were forced to move almost all of their operations into Deir al-Balah before this evacuation order. And they were vocal about needing to start this vaccination campaign. Israel know exactly what they're doing. They're forcing as many people as possible into as small a place as possible. They're severely overcrowded. These people are exhausted. They're hungry. They're tired. And now there's polio in the sewage, in the water, and the UN can't do this essential vaccination campaign. And it just feels so orchestrated. And yet it's still being underplayed in the media and denied almost. Mm-hmm. If they aren't stepping in now, it almost makes me feel like they won't.
Yeah, I think that's the part that's really hard to kind of tackle now. I think way back when, at least after October 7th, I'm not going to say when it started because I know what that indicates when people say that. But the there was the feeling at the beginning that we had to cover it. We had to talk about it. If we pushed it to the front of people's social media feeds, if it was more that people were seeing, then surely there'd be nowhere left to hide for governments to address it and for people to act. We're now seeing a disease that has been nearly eradicated globally and hasn't been seen in Gaza for 25 years crop up, and people can't get vaccines. I don't know. Like it's. I think that same. It kind of reminded me of what we heard the other day from David Lammy, where they were talking about the arms sales of like, well, we don't want to stop the good arms being sold. We want to keep selling the arms to them that are the right ones, but not the offensive ones, just the defensive ones. And it turns out that apparently nobody knows the difference between offensive and defensive.
Because of course we'd never know what is happening here, but on
there's no way of knowing anything. How are
there
we
is
supposed
no
to know?
way of course not. It's almost like by the IDF on Sunday allowing these vaccines through, they're having plausible deniability, and so are our governments by saying, well, they did help, and the vaccines are being stored just outside of the evacuation zone, and we're just going to have to trust that Israel don't bomb near that very specific part, as if that almost excuses not properly addressing this. Because they can't reach those areas, and they need to vaccinate something like 90% of the children in order to stop a viral outbreak.
I think, yeah, it reminds me, I was speaking to someone the other day about an event that we're running in Manchester, who works with people on the ground in Gaza, and his close friend lost his son a couple of months ago after the attack on Al-Shifa. They are not 100% on what happened in the specifics of the situation, but their son was a surgeon, and they believe that the reason that he was killed was because he stepped off the road of the evacuation route. You know, they were supposed to take the coastal road. He stepped off of that road in order to help a woman who was on the floor, and was immediately killed by a drone.
Absolutely awful things, and they keep bombing the one road that they're allowed to walk on just as soon as they start. Like, I think Bisan was talking about how as soon as they said this was an evacuation order, the tanks had already started rolling in, which has been their tactic throughout this genocide.
Yeah, it's horrifying. I hope our government grows a backbone at some point, or at least starts to look out for themselves, because we are now in a situation where everything that is happening here is on them and on the rest of the world leaders that we're seeing. I think it does kind of bring us into the next conversation around Bisan. Obviously, that's goes from completely different ends, from like one of the most extreme health emergencies that we've seen, through to the sheer pettiness of the attacks that we've seen on her character. Before we do move on to the story, I want to check in with the chat. I want to see how everybody's doing. I want to thank you for joining us today. It appears as though we are discussing pensions, but for all of you that are joining us, I really appreciate it. If you do like what we're talking about here, as we were saying, there are so many, there's been so many kind of misleading characterizations of different things in the mainstream media at the moment. There are a lot of stories that aren't being covered the way that they should. They're either not being covered at all, or they're being covered in a way that is completely minimizing the damage that's being done. What we're trying to do at Turn Left is we're trying to build more of a platform for genuine socialist discussion in media. We're only covering a few stories in each live at the moment, but they often include these ones that we feel are being misrepresented or not represented at all. We want to grow an opportunity for progressive socialist discussion that doesn't include things like just debating basic human rights every time there's a panel on. We want to be able to talk in the context of the nuances between that. If you do want to be part of the journey there, you can support us on Patreon. I think we have a £3 a month and £5 a month tier. All of that information is over on patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Any support, any shares, any likes are always appreciated by us, because we do not have the pockets of Mr. Murdoch or the Rothermeres. So any support is very much appreciated. Let's get into this. So yeah, I think this kind of indicates the sheer level of aggression and control that we are seeing, all the way from people being unable to access vaccinations, through to the mission of preventing a 25-year-old woman who has seen her entire life destroyed around her from being allowed to receive even a minor gesture of recognition for her work. So Bisan, as I'm sure most of us will know, has been working with the media outlet AJ Plus, and was recently nominated in the Outstanding Hard News Feature Story Short Form category at the Emmys for It's Bisan from Gaza and I'm Still Alive. And last week, the nonprofit Creative Community for Peace came out with their whole chests to directly attack her for her work documenting the genocide in Gaza, and wrote an open letter that claimed that she had ties to a terrorist organization. That was 150 celebrities that signed that open letter. Some of them are the likes of those that we already know about, like Deborah Messing, but we have others from across the entertainment industry signing a letter to say that this 25-year-old woman should not be allowed any kind of recognition, and pretty much directly slandered. Now, NATAS, the body behind the Emmys, have responded, and this is what the CEO and president had to say. NATAS is aware of the reports cited in your letter and initially surfaced by a communications consultant in the region that appear to show a then teenage Bisan Auda speaking at various PFLP associated events between 6 and 9 years ago. NATAS has been unable to corroborate these reports, nor has it been able to date, to surface any evidence of more contemporary or active involvement by Auda with the PFLP organization. NATAS has found no grounds to date upon which to overturn the editorial judgment of the independent journalist that reviewed this material. That is from the NATAS CEO and president, Adam Sharp. So we knew that the tactics to silence Palestinians would get harsher and more brazen over time. Jessica, I don't know, I can't comprehend the idea of an incredibly wealthy film director sitting in an incredibly expensive house, looking at a video from Bisan, filmed on her phone, documenting her family's evacuation under fire from missiles all around her, and thinking to themselves, someone has to make sure this girl never gets an Emmy.
It's truly insane. It really is. It's like these genocide deniers even are so hell-bent on doing everything they can to silence someone like Bisan, who is probably the most admirable civilian journalist of my entire lifetime. And they're trying to paint her out as a terrorist by affiliation, saying she's legitimizing a terrorist organization and subsequently the Emmys, but she's legitimizing the horrors that Palestinians are experiencing under the foot of Israel. She's legitimizing a genocide, and they mentioned that in their mission statement and in the letter. And I think it's just they're trying so hard to suppress the word genocide from ever being spoken about. But we've seen her videos, and they are so grounded in the real consequential human reality of what's going on. Is so grounded in Palestinian lives that they are just reaching at any evidence they can, as weak evidence as they can, in order to support their mission of trying to silence something that the entire world is witnessing.
No, you're right. I think, yeah, the letter itself, the open letter, I don't want to kind of direct people over to it at the moment because I don't think it really deserves that. But the headline about the letter being released claimed that she was tied to a terrorist organization. In the body of the letter, they referred to it as well documented that she had these ties. Obviously, they had a little hyperlink. You click through the hyperlink. It's not well documented that she has terrorist ties.
No.
But the framing and the confidence of it, I think, is what scares me.
Yeah, I mean, it'd definitely be a lot more worrying if the NATAS even didn't take the stance that they did, defending her, saying, no, this isn't evidence enough, because it's not. She's talking at rallies, and the last dated, most recent one I could find was in 2018, where she was quite literally just talking about tax and economic cuts. It's just truly insane how they are saying that is affiliation enough for her to be classed as a terrorist and an anti-Semitic.
It's, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's been a real tough week for non-white women in the media, being targeted by some of the worst feminists that we can see, some of the signatories of those letters, of that letter. And I remember as well when Motaz was receiving awards and commendations after he escaped Gaza, and everything that he said about it was like, this doesn't mean anything to me anymore. Like, this is hollow, because you're talking about people who are undergoing extreme trauma constantly, who have an ongoing genocide against their people, and the idea that that would still be something for these people to want to take away from someone, it makes me furious.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Absolutely, just awful things. To this woman, Bisan, is just truly incredible. Her videos are so genuine and so raw in what is actually happening. We can see those videos, and they're acting as if she's constantly berating Israeli people and the acts that they're doing, when in the videos that she's been nominated for an Emmy for, they aren't like that at all.
I think it's an incredible act of spin. And I think one of the things that we talked about at the very beginning, and we'll talk about a little bit more now in the next story, is there is a strange little face of the mainstream media now that is starting to, I don't know, the veil is slipping. I feel like I'm going to get my my analogies mixed up or my metaphors mixed up, but there's a thin veil happening, and I know that much. And I think that'll kind of take us into the final kind of talking point for tonight. But we want to open this up into a slightly wider discussion. So in terms of this kind of the mainstream media face that we have been seeing, if you've managed to get past Oasis, if you've managed to get past the fish and chip rises, and you're trying to keep track of certain topics, you may know about the whistleblowers at Pink News. If you don't know Pink News, it's a online publication, news publication that focuses on LGBT issues. Recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, there was a tweet shared from an account called Pink News Whistleblowers, including a voice recording of the CEO of the media site claiming that he doesn't want Pink News to be seen as some such kind of charity for the trans community. The recording was released last week. If we could bring it up now, we'll just listen through and then we can discuss. Ooh. I'm just checking if we have the audio for this one. We may not. If not, let me double check if we can pull it through or if we have a little script for it or anything. If not, I will say, Jessica, you are one of the primary breakers of this news in terms of covering the story. So I may actually see if you're able to give us a rundown. I think our audio is not going to work on this one. Take me through it. What's happening?
So it was essentially a voice recording of the CEO, Benjamin Cohen, talking about how trans issues are too contentious to start a campaign on. This was pre-election, as it would harm his relationships with advertisers and brands, saying it was more contentious to report on trans stories than it was about gay marriage. On top of that, I think one of the most substantially awful things that he did was receive a £280,000 grant from Google to launch an advocacy platform specifically for trans people, and a very cheaply made platform was never launched. That's something the trans community could have really benefited from, because Pink News is a well-known, respected name, respected enough to get such a substantial amount of money from Google, but trust was placed in the wrong hands. Him and his husband, the COO, Anthony James, just have a history of misogyny, racism, ableism within the company. A lot of people have left because of it. It's just standard felonious CEO behavior, but at the detriment of a minority that's being seen as someone who they're supporting. And it's just really disappointing for a lot of people. The way I see it, the majority of people have the ability to make a conscious choice about whether or not they'll be actively involved in the news. Mm-hmm. But for minorities, specifically the trans community at the moment, a lot of people don't have that choice because we are politicized and there's legislation mainstream press being actively.
Sorry, Jessica, I had a very slight delay on that last bit.
I'm about.
Don't worry. Can you hear me okay now?
I can hear you. Okay, yeah, can you hear me?
Oh yes, I've got you. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, you were
Fantastic.
It was just the last sentence I think I missed.
Where did you get to? I can't quite remember what the last sentence was. Sorry. I was just talking about how disappointing it is because the mainstream press is so actively against us. So we turn to Pink News because it's this respected name that seems to be knowledgeable. Like, they have a very clear demographic bias of the LGBTQIA plus community. So when I was thinking about Benjamin Cohen pandering to transphobic advertisers, that doesn't really seem like the case, because advertisers would want to work with Pink News to be seen as progressive. So him saying that that would harm his relationship with advertisers, they're making a conscious choice to work with Pink News for a very specific reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that was part of this is one of the stories that I think has been completely overlooked in the mainstream media side of things. And it's strange because typically when it comes to the mainstream media, they're normally quite happy to jump on controversies with smaller outlets.
Absolutely, yeah.
The non-legacy media in that sense. But we haven't seen very much. And when you search, obviously, Pink News transphobia, you get news articles from Pink News about transphobia.
Pink news articles, that's all you see, yeah.
But I think our producer has mentioned that the audio is working on the video. So if everybody is happy to listen to it now, if it's not going to work now, I will pretend that it never happened and we'll move into the chat.
Things that relate to trans and non-binary remain incredibly contentious. I think that the marriage, the idea, and we're celebrating 10 years of same-sex marriage this year, I think that the society has moved on and it has been generally accepted. And while, yes, when we were doing it, it was contentious, I think that the other things are even more contentious than that was then, and are significantly contentious now, and there is significant brand and partner nervousness around that topic. And so, in my view, they are different things. I think that we just have to be careful, and it's like, that's for others to do. And also the business can't afford to do that. It's the role of others to seek to change narratives. If we start doing too many things, I think it will harm the conversations with advertisers for other things, because it gives the perception that Pink News is something different to it is. What we are is an entertainment content powerhouse. We don't want to be positioning ourselves as some sort of charity.
It's just awful. I want to touch on him saying trans issues are contentious. What I've been saying quite a lot is trans issues are only contentious to those who are transphobic. Their mission statement literally says that they are advocating for the equality of all of the members of the LGBTQIA plus community, but is then worried that trans issues are controversial, but they're only controversial to those who think our lives are controversial, which aren't people he should be engaging with.
I was literally about to say that exact thing. As soon as I heard that again, our mission is we're not here to make changes. Their mission statement says we're here to empower change.
Yeah. And it says it's the role of others to change narratives. You are the press, you are the media. It is quite literally the media, if not intentionally, subsequential role of the press is changing narratives within societies. And he had the opportunity for this company to be remembered as one of the primary helpful organizations that helped move the trans identity into one that's accepted more. But now he's just going to be remembered with the other organizations that sold us out.
It's infuriating. I'm just looking at it as we speak. Pink News exists to inform, inspire change, and empower people to be themselves. Why do people keep saying that they're here to do the change and do it. We've come full circle. We've come all the way back around to the
Yeah,
start with the
we've done
change.
a lot of it.
There's a lot of lies about change happening at the
Yeah,
moment. It's
really disappointing because I feel like with Pink News, for a lot of us who were very involved in what's been said about us, we were aware of Pink News's shortcomings. On TikTok specifically, they have just such a complete lack of moderation for their comments. They let the most vile transphobia just brew in there, targeted towards all of their viewers. But it's fine, it gets engagement, you know, we get the comments up, it gets the videos seen more. So we're going to allow people to be violently, verbally assaulted in our comment section.
I think, yeah, I mean, this is the part of the thing that is so frustrating with this as well. I feel like over the last few months, especially seeing what's been happening in Gaza and seeing the amount of, I think there's been a broad awakening from people of like, nobody's safe. Like there's not a safe space for people. Whether it's celebrities that you thought were going to do the right thing and care about the right thing, or whether you're talking about publications that you trust. Me personally, a lot of Neil Gaiman was a real blow for me in terms of finding out about what was another problematic celebrity. Turns out to be anyone who you admire, anyone you look up to. I think we are really starting to feel that between the elite and normal people. What is distressing with this one is like this was supposed to be some sort of safe space, but also at the same time we're seeing a lot more insidious kind of anti-trans propaganda spreading across these mainstream outlets as well. Something that we were talking about before the stream was around the BBC's hiring of Sophia Batiza as their new gender and identity reporter. As an example, the BBC is supposed to be neutral, it's supposed to be balanced, it's not supposed to be incentivized by fear-mongering or anything like that. You won't see the same sort of headlines as you see in things like The Telegraph. And yet, when you do put a critical eye to a lot of the content around the trans community, you realize that there's a lot of insidious, subtly transphobic content. I'm calling it subtle from the perspective of, I imagine it stands out pretty clearly when you're aware of it.
It is very subtle, yeah, painfully subtle. And I think it is a reflection of who Sophia Batiza is following and who she's engaging in her feed. I wrote down just a few. She follows Helen Joyce of Sex Matters. She follows Sex Matters and LGB Alliance, Trans Widows Voices, and Transgender Trend. Just all of these overtly anti-trans pages, and the kind of gender critical language pops up every now and then in the articles, specifically in the Roxanne Tickle versus the Giggle for Girls app case. Almost immediately, she said that Roxanne Tickle was removed on the basis of being male. No self-respecting or like actually progressive gender and identity reporter would ever frame that question that way, or statement that way even. They would at least put it in quotation marks, but it wasn't. And she later says, identifies as a woman, but the Australian Federal Court ruling literally stated that referring to Roxanne Tickle as a woman was legally unimpeachable. And yet here we have the BBC's gender and identity reporter saying she was removed for being male, which just wasn't the case.
It's so like, it's funny because I know like we have some people, like I was reading about it the other day, it's something like 4 in 10 people won't read past the headline when they're looking at the news. I consider myself to be someone who's pretty intense about looking at bias when I'm looking through reporting, but going through some of the coverage that we see around the trans community and trans issues, it is difficult to detect. Like it's trying to spot like a black hole. It's trying to spot something that's not there.
Definitely, yeah.
I think the example that I was looking at from Sophia was there was another article written about Iman Khalif and another boxer that was embroiled in this whole insane folk devil row that happened in the last couple of weeks, and not once throughout that article
this witch hunt towards them.
Yeah, and not once in that article did she refer to either of the boxers as she or women.
No, they were fighters. We can only talk about them as fighters because we can't corroborate this information from the International Boxing Committee, so we just can't possibly know.
It's infuriating.
It's just awful. And then she said that in the archive article that she wrote, she said that they both had XY chromosomes, but then corrected it in an updated version of the article to say that we don't know if this information is true. But then I wrote down what else she said. Critics have speculated that perhaps the fighters have DSD, but within that paragraph, she's almost implying that if they do have DSD, she can't possibly call them women within the broader context of that paragraph. And it's just, she is the gender and identity reporter. We need the creative wording, the very small fine print to be completely on our side. Otherwise, people are going to read that article and they're going to go, this is a great big piece on some information that's been weaponized by Oliver Brown in the Telegraph. Just about every single article he wrote for weeks was on the boxers. And now we're seeing positive articles very creatively saying, we kind of share the gender critical mindset, but we're not going to overtly say that to people in our articles because we want to be perceived as neutral.
Yeah, I think this is something that, to be honest, I'm tying it back into the wider issue that we are seeing with mainstream media presenting, weaponizing a lot of these supposedly neutral faces. It comes back as well, I'm going to bring it all around, to Keir Starmer's respectability politics. The idea that we're going to be polite about the ways that we put this bigotry in. And I think what scares me at the moment is, in the same way we have writers like Sophia saying, well, we don't know, there's no way to confirm whether or not they're women, when we know that they are. We also have BBC coverage saying someone like a woman in Palestine has claimed that her entire family have been killed in a strike. She's claimed it, but we can't possibly
know if that's Israel. So we're going to leave the headline as it is. Yeah, it's just a claim. We've got no way of verifying this information. And it was like with their reporting on the UN aid operation that had to be paused. When I first saw that article, it was at the same time that Reuters and Al Jazeera have posted about almost exclusively the polio vaccination campaign within their articles. And then the BBC wrote 190 words, not mentioning the vaccine once, but they can't even get away with saying we needed to verify that information because the IDF allowed the vaccines to come through on Sunday, and the UN were vocal about needing to vaccinate an unsubstantiated amount of children before the vaccines were put in place. So the BBC deliberately choosing not to report on this information just because we can't verify if they have to stop the campaign or not, and then missing out all of the context for no apparent reason other than they just don't feel like talking about it.
It's really scary. And I think when you've then got like Sophia's happy to go straight in on the XY chromosomes, we can go all in on that, throw that accusation straight out. But then when it comes to the other side, we need to verify.
On the first day that story came out, it took me half an hour to figure out that this information wasn't trusted, that it was posted by a corrupt Russian source on a Telegram channel that just got blown out of proportion. And yet here we are, her days after it's gone out, her posting this big think piece on information, still not sure if we can't fully verify this information. So I'm just going to say it as if it's true almost.
That's also a point in the way that that piece was shared. It was very similar to, it was like an explainer. It was like, what's going on? Here's the facts. It wasn't an opinion piece. I'm really interested to see a little bit of what we've got in the chat for this, because I do love an overarching theme, and I feel like we have brought around kind of a wider topic within this. I think we've got a few interesting comments within here. I don't understand the anti-trans sentiment that surfaced. Even people I know who have more important things to worry about parrot the same bigoted dog whistling. I think this is an important one from that perspective. It does seem to people who don't have the automatic transphobic side of things like immediately, it feels confusing as to why we're doing this. I want to get your thoughts on this, Jessica, because to me it feels like white supremacy. It feels like another element of supremacy and misogyny.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw with the Imani Khalif situation, and the entire gender critical movement just boils down to Eurocentric beauty standards and enforcing this antiquated version of feminism. They think that we're violating feminism by enforcing binary. but we're showing the opposite, and they're being very subtle in the papers, talking about almost any time trans people are referred to, it's always trans-identified male or identifies as a woman, in the same subtext where they're painting us out to be predators and printing quotes from Kate Barker, the chief executive of the LGB Alliance, in Guardian articles, one that's perceived to be a bit more left-leaning. So even for the mainstream, who think they're progressive, they know a lot about these things, and they're not going to be easily influenced when every single piece of information that's being told to them about a specific minority that chances are they don't interact with much in their life, they're not going to have many places to counteract that understanding. I mean, even my dad, when I mentioned the boxing situation to him immediately, oh, the trans boxers.
Oh.
Just because that's how it was talked about. And it's just a reflection of how it is for a lot of people. A few words come up and then that's the understanding, because we are small in number and people don't need to put this huge amount of thought into us. That's not what we want at all. We want to be left alone to live, but we are talked about a lot. So those thoughts are being manufactured almost.
I think you're completely right there. Yeah, as we've got the comment here, it's a smaller, less understood minority. It's a gateway for. This is a point that, oh my God, I could scream this point for the next 4 hours, but I won't, because we are going to finish in about 10 minutes. But the tie between outright misogyny and misogynistic groups and the TERF movement and the white feminists, it's like the little emoji of all the hands being tied. Like the Alliance Defending Freedom is it's tagged as like a hate group in the US, and their two big campaigns, well, three. They've got one, they want to get rid of critical race theory in schools. They've got one that they want to get rid of abortion rights for women, and they've got one which is that they want to sterilize trans people in Europe as well. That's what they're pushing on. And those are the people with the finances behind it to actually lobby these kind of laws, transphobic laws, things that are being positioned as a protection for women. It's the exact same group that's going to turn around and remove. I think there was one in Nevada where they managed to have two laws in the same day repealed. One was specifically around women's abortion rights, and the other was around healthcare for trans teens.
And they can do it almost instantaneously. We saw with Victoria Atkins on the last day, hours before our ex-government dismantled, just thought, no, I'm going to abuse this review that didn't even call for an emergency ban on a medication. It is a reflection of the government being able to manufacture every single step of a process to restrict bodily autonomy or ban a medication for a group they don't agree with or for something they don't understand. And I think it's very naive, but I can almost understand why people don't think about it broader than the trans community, because we've been painted as the big issue that is in healthcare and societies at the moment. So people, but they do need to think about the broader implications of this, because we are seeing medication being banned because they wanted it to be banned. And tying on with the TERF argument, I feel like the trans community at this stage doesn't even need to do too much to combat the gender criticals other than amplify their voices, because they are showing they don't know what they're talking about. They're consistently messing up. J.K. Rowling's been told that she's in a bit of legal trouble and finally was silenced for at least a bit. All we need to do is let them flip up and then amplify their voices. Like with the Roxanne and Tickle case, Tickle v. Giggle case even, they had gender critical self-proclaimed experts. The likes of Helen Joyce, who these gender criticals rely on, they almost idolize her as this messiah, this all-knowing person who can dispel the trans ideology with her knowledge about what gender actually is. She was found to be no expert at all in the matter, and none of her evidence was used. These people will trip over themselves with time.
I think that's why it's so frustrating to see these middling, these centrists not taking sides, not sticking up, because it is such an easy thing to disprove. I think I was talking to someone the other day who said, like, it feels like every time people talk about wanting to protect women, it's it only happens when there's a chance to be bigoted in some other way. We want to talk about protecting women in bathrooms, even though practically it doesn't. None of the options that people try and present for that make any sense in any way. The centrist specialty, that is true. But if we're talking about violence against women and girls, it's because of immigration. It's because of the immigrants, maybe. Maybe they're the ones doing it. It's anything but looking at the actual problem that we're facing.
Which was declared, what was it, like a national emergency
Yep.
in this country.
National
And still,
emergency.
we're seeing all of this rhetoric that there's too many immigrants coming in and the trans people are bad.
Mm-hmm.
It all ties in. When we say there's no equality until everyone is equal, it's because these things seep into other groups of people and it affects their lives. It's this fear of something they don't understand. Mm-hmm. But that misunderstood confusion comes back and harms them almost every time.
I mean, it's Keir Starmer's standing army of police. Maybe I don't like seeing racists have a good day. I'm glad they've had a bad day. I'm not super keen on a massive increase in police presences. Don't feel like that's going to work out well for us. I'm not super keen on invasive procedures to check if female athletes should be allowed to compete, because I feel like that's not going to play out well for us in the end. I'm not very keen on really anything that's going to fully deplete our rights, because it's very rare that when that happens and when that kind of treatment comes into place, it doesn't normally work out well for anyone in any minority group.
It's to them saying, we got away with this one thing, we're going to do it again, but we're going to keep quiet about it. And they could already be doing that implementation. Like, this has been a very long process to specifically get the gender services that they want. For example, that's prioritizing exploratory therapy, repackaged conversion therapy. That seemed almost like an end goal. Mm-hmm. This has been going on for years now, and they're being very subtle about it. And I feel like a lot of trans people who are actively involved can see all of the pieces of the scandal, but for the majority, and that is a big majority, these go very unnoticed, those steps in the...
Oh, I think I lost your audio for just a second there. Towards the end. Wait, hang on one moment. Let me see. Okay. Jessica is just reconnecting her audio, but I think this is part of why we wanted to have this conversation. This is the first time for me hosting on Turn Left, and I think it was important to bring this kind of conversation to light across the board with it, and especially to get Jessica's perspective. You've returned. Are you safe and well?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm good. Should be back for good.
Fantastic. I'm not going to ask you what the last sentence was again. I feel like that's like a very difficult test for someone
to pass. That'll be gone. That'll be gone.
We don't want people to be fascists anymore.
Yeah, that's what it boils down to. No more fascism. Get someone more exciting. We need actual change.
Someone give me just a single crumb of real change.
A change, please.
A crumb of it. And if you're not going to give it to me, stop telling me that you are.
Yeah.
Just stop lying about it. Double D in the chat. Yeah, more empathy, 100%. Speaking of visibility, getting people's voices heard. So Jessica is active on TikTok, does some incredible breakdowns of a lot of these issues. That's actually how we discovered each other. That's how millennials meet online all the time now. Don't go outside. But yeah, Jessica, I don't know if you want to give a little rundown of anything that you're talking about at the moment over there.
So at the moment, I think a huge thing is the Trans Kids Deserves Better are currently occupying the Department of Education. Mm-hmm. They're demanding to be treated with actual dignity and respect, which we've been told we're being treated with, but we're currently being ostracized. And this group of just the most dedicated kids are fighting for their rights. They have been doing some incredible work this year, and I'm yet to see anything in the national press about it. There was a protest in Belfast that recently happened for the puberty blocker ban. There's nothing in the press about that. It's like the trans community are being so vocal at the moment about their issues, and we're just being pushed down even more.
I think, yeah, all give platform Jess, get over there and see what she's talking about, because it's crazy when you actually start scratching the surface of so much of these stories. When you start scratching the surface of the news that you see when you go on your front page or what Google tries to send you, it's unbelievable how much activity, and a lot of it is positive. There's a lot of positive movement happening across the board. It's just not given the platform that it deserves. So please do go and follow Jessica over on TikTok. You can also catch me on TikTok under Sneakcret. Before we go, I do want to thank everybody for joining us this evening even. I work on a different timeline to other people, so I often forget what the timings are for us. But there's a lot of news happening all the time. If you do want us to be covering more stories, please do help us grow this platform, either by liking this stream, either by sharing it. Make a clip of it if you want. As long as it's flattering, I don't care. You can also support us over on Patreon, as I said earlier, for £3 or £5 a month. Or you can even make a one-off donation over at patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Thank you again, everybody who's joined us in the chat. It's been fantastic to hear from you, and I appreciate your hosting tonight. It was very kind of you. I've been Sneakcret. It's been lovely to see you all, and we'll see you again soon.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.